Imagine walking through a calm American woodland in late summer and discovering a fruit that looks completely ordinary from the outside, but when you cut it open, you find soft golden flesh with a flavor people often describe as a combination of banana, mango, melon, and vanilla. It sounds like something imported from a tropical island, right? But this unusual fruit is actually native to the United States, and for generations it was one of America's best-kept fruit secrets. Today, we're talking about the pawpaw tree, a forgotten native fruit tree that deserves a place in far more gardens. Welcome back to Daily Garden Gate, where we uncover practical gardening ideas, unusual plants, and forgotten treasures that can make your garden more productive and fascinating. If you've never heard of the pawpaw before, stay with me because by the end of this video, you may be looking at your garden completely differently. And if you've heard of pawpaws but have never grown one, you'll discover why this strange little tree has gardeners, homesteaders, and native plant enthusiasts paying attention. The pawpaw, scientifically known as Asimina triloba, is one of those plants that seems almost too interesting to be real. It is native to large parts of eastern and central North America, growing naturally in forests, along river valleys, and in areas where the soil stays reasonably moist. Unlike many familiar fruit trees, pawpaws don't immediately look like the typical apple, pear, or peach tree. Their large, tropical-looking leaves can make them look surprisingly exotic, even though they belong right here in North America. And that's part of what makes the pawpaw so fascinating. For a long time, this fruit was much more familiar to people living in regions where pawpaw trees naturally occurred. Native peoples used the fruit, and later generations of settlers also harvested it from the wild. The fruit was eaten fresh and used in various preparations. But as commercial agriculture developed, a relatively small number of fruit varieties began dominating grocery stores. Apples, oranges, bananas, peaches, and other familiar fruits became household staples, while lesser-known native fruits gradually disappeared from everyday life. The pawpaw didn't disappear completely, of course. In many areas, wild pawpaw patches continued growing quietly along streams and woodland edges. But because the fruit doesn't store and ship particularly well once ripe, it never became a major supermarket crop. That limitation may have helped keep the pawpaw out of mainstream agriculture, but for the home gardener, it can actually be an advantage. Think about that for a moment. You don't necessarily need a fruit tree because it can be shipped across the country and sit on a supermarket shelf for weeks. In a backyard garden, the priorities can be completely different. You want something productive, interesting, suited to your growing conditions, and enjoyable to harvest when it's ready. And that's exactly where the pawpaw becomes incredibly appealing. One of the first things you'll notice about a pawpaw tree is its foliage. The leaves are large, elongated, and almost tropical-looking. When a mature pawpaw is growing in the right location, the tree can create a beautiful, lush appearance. During autumn, those leaves can also develop attractive yellow tones before falling. So even before you harvest a single fruit, the tree can add ornamental value to the landscape. But let's get to the reason you're really interested: the fruit. A ripe pawpaw has soft, creamy flesh surrounding its relatively large seeds. The flavor is the part that surprises most people. It's sweet, rich, fragrant, and distinctly different from the fruit you normally find at the grocery store. Descriptions vary, but people commonly compare it to a mixture of banana, mango, melon, vanilla, or custard. Of course, the exact flavor can depend on the variety and growing conditions, but that's what makes tasting a fresh pawpaw such a memorable experience. And here's another reason pawpaws can become an obsession. They give you something that supermarkets generally can't provide. When a pawpaw ripens, you want to enjoy it relatively quickly. That means growing your own tree can give you access to a fruit that is difficult to experience at its best unless you live close to where it is grown. Now, before you rush outside and plant one, there's an important detail you need to understand. Pawpaws have particular growing preferences. They aren't simply a plant you put anywhere and forget about. Young trees especially can appreciate some protection from intense sunlight, wind, and harsh conditions while they establish themselves. As they mature, their needs can change, and a healthy, established tree can handle much more sunlight depending on the climate and location. This is why choosing the planting site matters so much. Pawpaws generally appreciate fertile, well-drained soil that retains enough moisture to prevent the root zone from becoming excessively dry. They naturally occur in environments where moisture is available, so a location that constantly dries out may create unnecessary problems. At the same time, you don't want roots sitting in stagnant water. Good drainage and consistent moisture are much better goals than either extreme. Another fascinating feature of the pawpaw is its relationship with pollination. If you're hoping for fruit, planting a single tree may not always be your best strategy. Many gardeners choose to plant 2 or more pawpaw trees with suitable genetic differences so that cross-pollination has a better chance of occurring. This is one of those situations where planting a small group can be much more rewarding than planting one isolated tree and wondering why fruit production is disappointing.
And pawpaw pollination is particularly interesting because the flowers don't rely on the same pollinators people usually associate with backyard fruit trees. Pawpaw flowers can attract certain flies and beetles rather than depending primarily on honeybees. The flowers have a distinctive appearance and can have an unusual odor, which is part of the plant's natural strategy for attracting its pollinators. That means you shouldn't panic if you don't see honeybees covering your pawpaw blossoms. The tree has its own ecological relationships. In fact, this is one of the reasons native plants can be so fascinating. Instead of forcing a plant into a completely artificial system, you're creating a small garden environment where different organisms can interact naturally. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest mistakes people make when discovering unusual fruit trees: expecting instant results. A pawpaw is a tree, not a packet of lettuce seeds. Depending on whether you're starting from seed or purchasing a grafted tree, the time until significant fruit production can vary. Seed-grown trees can take longer and may not produce fruit identical to the parent tree. Grafted trees can offer more predictable fruit characteristics and may reach fruiting sooner. If your main goal is getting known quality fruit as efficiently as possible, understanding the difference between seed-grown and grafted plants is important. Growing from seed, however, can still be an incredibly rewarding experience. Pawpaw seeds are large and interesting, and raising a tree from seed allows you to watch the entire process from the beginning. But pawpaw seeds have special handling requirements and shouldn't simply be treated like ordinary vegetable seeds that can be dried, stored anywhere, and planted whenever you remember them. If you're growing from seed, follow reliable instructions for your specific climate and seed source. Once established, pawpaw trees can become a valuable part of a home landscape. They can provide fruit, shade, habitat, and seasonal interest. And because they're native to large portions of the country, they can also fit naturally into gardens designed around native plants and local ecosystems. But here's something else that makes the pawpaw especially exciting for gardeners who want to grow more of their own food. It gives you another layer of diversity. Imagine having apples on one side of your property, berries along a fence, herbs near the kitchen, vegetables in raised beds, and then a small group of pawpaws tucked into a suitable part of the garden. Instead of depending on 1 or 2 familiar crops, you're building a more diverse food landscape, and diversity can make gardening much more interesting.
The large leaves can also create a very different visual texture from many common fruit trees. If your garden feels repetitive, introducing an unusual native fruit tree can instantly change the character of the space. It can become a conversation piece, the tree that makes visitors stop and ask, "What is that?" Then, when you tell them it's a pawpaw, you can introduce them to a piece of American food history that many people have never experienced. And don't overlook the wildlife connection. Native trees can provide ecological value beyond the fruit we harvest. Pawpaw leaves serve as food for the caterpillars of the zebra swallowtail butterfly, creating an important relationship between the tree and a native butterfly species. That means the same plant you're growing for fruit can become part of a larger backyard habitat. This is one of the reasons I love the idea of forgotten fruit trees. Gardening doesn't have to be only about producing the biggest harvest possible. A great garden can feed people while also supporting insects, birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. The more layers you create, the more alive the garden becomes. Now, let's talk about harvesting. One of the most exciting moments with a pawpaw is watching the fruit develop and slowly approach maturity. The fruits usually hang from the branches in clusters, and as they ripen, their appearance changes. You don't want to rely on a single visual clue because ripeness can vary. Learning the signs of mature fruit from your particular variety and region is important. When pawpaws are ripe, they become soft and fragrant. This is when the fruit is at its most enjoyable, but also when you need to pay attention. Unlike apples, which can often sit around for a while, ripe pawpaws have a short storage life. That's another reason they make so much sense for home gardens. You can eat the ripe flesh fresh, scoop it out with a spoon, or explore recipes that use pawpaw as an ingredient. Some gardeners use the pulp in desserts, smoothies, baked goods, frozen treats, or other homemade creations. Because the flavor is so distinctive, even a relatively small harvest can provide plenty of opportunities to experiment. But remember, pawpaw seeds are large and should be removed before eating the flesh. You don't want to treat the seeds like tiny edible seeds found in other fruits. Enjoy the soft pulp and discard the seeds appropriately.
Now, there's another reason the pawpaw deserves more attention. It represents an entirely different way of thinking about food gardening. For years, many gardeners have been trained to think primarily about the fruits and vegetables available at the local store. We browse seed catalogs and garden centers based on what we're already familiar with. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, apples, blueberries, these are all fantastic choices. But there is an enormous world of less common edible plants waiting to be discovered. Pawpaw is one of those plants. And once you discover it, you may start asking a bigger question. What other native foods have we forgotten? That's where gardening gets really exciting. You stop thinking of the garden as simply a collection of plants and start thinking of it as a living library of food, history, ecology, and experimentation. A tree like the pawpaw isn't just something producing fruit, it's a connection to landscapes that existed long before modern supermarkets. Of course, you should always check whether pawpaw is suitable for your particular climate and growing conditions before planting. Native range doesn't automatically mean every location will provide the right combination of winter temperatures, summer heat, moisture, soil, and growing season length. Local extension services, native plant organizations, and experienced growers in your region can be excellent sources of information. And if you decide to plant one, don't make the mistake of choosing a location simply because you have an empty spot. Think about the tree's eventual size. Think about sunlight. Think about drainage. Think about access to water during establishment. Think about whether you can plant another compatible pawpaw nearby for pollination. And most importantly, think about the long-term garden design. A fruit tree is a commitment. The best planting decisions aren't based on what looks convenient today. They're based on what will make sense several years from now. That's especially important with pawpaw because its large leaves and natural growth habit can influence the space around it. Give it room to develop rather than squeezing it between structures or crowding it against other plants. And if you're gardening in an area where pawpaw naturally grows, take a walk through local woods or natural areas where you're legally allowed to explore. You may discover that this lost fruit is actually not lost at all. It may have been quietly growing around you for years while you simply didn't know what you were looking at. That might be the most wonderful thing about gardening. Sometimes the next exciting plant isn't something newly invented. Sometimes it's something old that we simply forgot to appreciate. The pawpaw has survived changing landscapes, changing food preferences, and generations of agricultural development. It remains a distinctive native fruit tree with a flavor unlike almost anything else you'll find in the produce aisle. And maybe that's why America's so-called lost fruit tree deserves a comeback. Not necessarily as the next giant commercial fruit crop, not as something that needs to replace every apple tree or blueberry bush, but as a backyard fruit tree, a native landscape plant, a wildlife-supporting tree, and a source of one of the most unusual fruits you can grow. Imagine stepping into your garden one late summer morning, seeing those large green leaves overhead, noticing the first ripe fruit beginning to fall, and realizing that you're about to taste something that many people have never tried. That's a pretty good reason to grow a tree. So if you're looking for something different to add to your garden, don't automatically choose the same fruit trees everyone else is planting. Look a little deeper, explore native fruits, ask what once grew naturally in your region. You might discover an entire world of edible plants hiding in plain sight. And the pawpaw could be the perfect place to start. If you enjoyed learning about this forgotten American fruit tree, make sure you're subscribed to Daily Garden Gate. We have plenty more gardening discoveries, forgotten plants, practical growing tips, and unusual crops coming your way. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever tasted a pawpaw? If you have, tell us what you thought it tasted like. And if you've never tried one, would you plant a pawpaw tree in your garden? Leave your answer in the comments because I would love to see how many gardeners already know about this incredible native fruit and how many are discovering it for the very first time today. Until next time, keep growing, keep experimenting, and keep looking beyond the ordinary. Because sometimes the most exciting treasures in your garden aren't new at all. Sometimes they've been waiting there for generations. And America's so-called forgotten pawpaw tree may be the sweetest discovery your garden has been missing.